Or can you have clearing conversations and problem solve so that everyone does get their needs met, and that responsibilities that you initially committed to and agreed to, that you aren't basically pulling the plug on those and abandoning one another. Do you have the resources to care for one another? And of course, with two parent households or multiple parent households, there may be more resources brought in, but then where's the time, attention, and presence that a child needs? Any relationship needs to thrive and to, because you'll always have conflict come up. And I think what you touched on, as in like different people seek different things.
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about two different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com, and when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
Hi there, this is Sifu Slim, and I am coming to you live from Santa Barbara, California. And today the discussion is about biochemistry, and specifically the biochemistry of relationships. And the subtopic will be Taboo, Evolutionary Ideas. And I am pleased to be in contact with Roxanne Abel, Roxanne Abel, who is coming to us from, are you in Ojai, Roxanne?
Presently in Oxnard.
You're currently in Oxnard. And so for the people who don't know who you are, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm originally from Georgia. I'm a performance artist, and with a degree in photography. I also do conceptual art and a lot of other things. I'm a Renaissance woman, Jill of many traits, and I love exploring human relationships and our dynamics of interaction, and even the things people are usually scared to talk about or only talk about behind closed doors, because I find the depths and the intrigue very interesting. No territory is off limits, though some of my Georgia upbringing comes back sometime and I will blush. I also do intuitive guidance and consulting, tarot card readings, but also like redesigning and helping people through transformation in their lives. Usually when people engage with me, transformation will happen, whether they're ready for it or not.
Is it possible that the seeking of Roxanne wouldn't happen unless there was something that they sought and you could help them find that thing that they sought?
Generally, I think when there is an attraction to myself or my services, whether consciously or subconsciously, someone is seeking to make some changes in their life.
Uh, that's good to know. So for anybody out there who's interested in tapping into Roxanne's specialties and intuition, how would someone get a hold of you?
They could go to my website. That's roxanneabel.com or www.roxanneabel.com, or they can go to my Facebook, which is also under Roxanne Abel. And there's a scheduling link there in my bio. And they can check out, some of the things that I post. I also have a community called Many Moons Community. And one reason I like to go into the depths is because I am a Scorpio moon. And I practice ritual and ceremony on the new moon and full moon, which we have one coming up tomorrow in Libra, which is a lot about relationship and how do you want to be loved and how do you want to love others, and finding that the balance of coming into a dynamic as two whole people, and the alchemical marriage, which is an esoteric concept. And I love exploring that. When I was in Italy in 2003 studying abroad, studying art, I made a ring for myself and married myself because I was exploring both my anima and animus, which is the feminine like energies and masculine energies within ourselves.
Wonderful. Italy is a great place to connect with yourself. I happen to participate as an exercise leader and grounding expert at a mindfulness retreat in Umbria a number of years ago. And the people that were in attendance in this program got to experience the nature, got to experience animals on a farm, making pasta, making cheese, and then eating the meal that was some of the things that they made as part of that. And grounding and mindfulness are two subjects that have come into the forefront in recent years. And my guess is because we're so automated and disconnected from any sense of natural living, that something had to come back and ground us and make us more connected in mind, body, and spirit. Maybe you can tell me if you're in agreement with that, Roxanne.
Totally in agreement with that. And it's a great way to connect to yourself, your higher power, the broader will, or your holy guardian angel, as some people call it.
So the biochemistry of relationships is something that I've been thinking about for quite some time. We learn about things that are behaviorally oriented. Growing up, you're supposed to do this and not that. You're supposed to be a good listener. You're supposed to learn what the other person's flash points are, hot buttons are, all these types of things. And then there's this whole cycle of biochemistry that can change within seconds. We can go fight, flight, or freeze. And I mentioned that I, in my connection with you, that I use almost no profanity unless I stub my toe on the foot of the bed. So what are your thoughts on fight, flight, and freeze, and the language that's more common now amongst young people, and not just young people, but everyone, that might be a little more profane than it was 20, 30 years ago?
Well, within the concept of our survival reactions, and also trauma reactions, recently I've been here, or actually over the past year or so, maybe two, the fawning response, or the people pleasing, appeasing response to fear, because you might be afraid of losing that relationship or rocking the boat or causing drama. And often that is also a trauma and fear response. And in terms of the language, I have a little bit of a different take on that, though I believe people often use what people would deem curse words or foul language unconsciously. I feel like knowing the history of it and as an expression of anger or frustration, it is sometimes useful.
Sometimes useful. Okay. So I've had the good fortune to have done a number of videos on human personality and psychology. One of them more recently is called Life is an Acting Job, which deals with the idea that we have to fit within the parameters, the social mores of the current situation. We can't go ballistic and do whatever we want in the supermarket, for example. When we find something that's bothersome to us, we can't go up and express that to everyone we see. There are diplomatic ways, there are mindful ways to express ourselves that that might fit the moment in a more appropriate way. So life as an acting job is one of them. I've had the chance to discuss biochemistry and female hormones with a woman who lives in Hawaii currently, and those are on YouTube under female hormones hyphen Christina Marie and Sifu Slim. And what we did there is we shared observations about the female cycle, the female interconnectedness with other females, how females' hormones will regulate to typically the most dominant female in that group. So if women go away for a weekend or a mindfulness retreat or what have you, or live in a school dorm or are roommates, they will typically synchronize their cycles, and that's fascinating to me. So we talked about those types of things and behavioral things that come about and relationship things that come about because of some of these things. And so those are things that I share as observations, and that's what I hope to do today with Roxanne, is share observations and have this be a learning experience for both of us and give us food for thought going forward. How do you feel about some of this, Roxanne?
I think that's great. And I think we also touched on the functionality of different relationship structures, which I've been exploring myself.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is this notion, Roxanne, of tradition. So for somebody nowadays, we have a tradition that is rooted in perhaps our parents, our aunts and our uncles, our older siblings, these types of things. And if someone in our close proximity got married, and why did they do that? Did they do that because of their ancestors, et cetera? It's this situation where ancestors are passing down these customs and mores to us. And in response to that, we have limited choices, in my opinion. So we either, according to, let's say, a Christian upbringing or a Muslim upbringing, you have this idea of mates being chosen for you or you choosing a mate. And then once that's done, you don't have the choice to leave that thing historically through that tradition. So it's kind of a gamble. So I'll shush there and see what your thoughts are about some of those traditions and mores and where that leads the modern person trying to make those decisions as they come into adulthood and they find a partner with whom they want to spend a decade or many decades together.
Yeah, that's a very broad topic. Within traditional, I think personally, sometimes I wish that my parents had arranged things, but I don't know if I actually would have trusted my parents to do that. I know, in some ways they knew me well enough to possibly pick the right mate for me, though we see all the Disney movies, and when people are forced into it, it's usually a catastrophe, whereas when there's love and chemistry, there's the happily ever after. Yet in my experience, many times that love and chemistry can be somewhat confusing because we don't make a rational decision when that is coming into play. I know for myself, I don't make rational decisions. I'm ADHD and pretty impulsive, and I've been exploring the or listening to on Audible the tape, The Human Magnet Syndrome by Ross Rosenberg. And it basically outlines how narcissists and codependents are magnetically attracted. And that comes from basically our lineage because of what we experienced and observed in our parents and their dynamic. And they did it from what they observed and what was comfortable, even though it might not have been functional in their parents' dynamic, and so on and so forth, going back a long time. And those situations can be toxic and abusive. And, you know, but those parents, would they have chosen the right partner? Because they would have chosen out of, their learning. But part of the work I do is rescripting, seeing life as a performance. Are we performing those patterns that we felt comfortable with because that was what we were brought up in? Or are we using mindfulness to like take a breath, take a step back, look at the pros and cons of the situation, know ourselves enough to decide what is best for us and in the structure or in the person we choose? And personally, I think monogamy can be functional if you have, if you're going to be doing business together or if you're going to raise children together, but then you have things coming into play like resources. If someone wants to be poly or try a non-monogamous structure, do you have the time to do the communication to do that? Do you have the resources to possibly have multiple children at once? Do you have the resources to care for one another? And of course, with two parent households or multiple parent households, there may be more resources brought in, but then where's the time, attention, and presence that a child needs?
What do you think, Roxanne, about the idea of the gamble, rolling the dice on another person? I have talked to people in the past, and some have said, I like to date people who are like me. Other people said, I like to date people who are different than I am. And so these are different attractions. Some is more, this person understands me. They're like I am. We do the same things. We think the same way. And the other one maybe is interested in a little bit more conflict and a little bit more excitement, a little bit more transformational connection. Maybe you could share what you think about the gamble, if it could be called that, of picking a partner, whether it's for 1 year or decades.
Right. What comes to mind first, and I'll get back to your question, is the 1 year concept. So in Celtic culture, they did head fastings for 1 year. It was basically like a test run. You were committed for a year to the partner that you chose or that the community chose, and you would live with them. You would do daily tasks together. You would basically act like a married couple. And if it worked out, you made a lifetime commitment with that person at the end of that year. And if it didn't, you chose another person to hand fast with.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I like that concept because you don't really know what you're getting into until you are in a private space and one-on-one with a person, and doing, performing life with them.
Yeah.
And can you remind me of the question that you initially started with?
So it would be the idea of rolling the dice in a gamble that lasts a period of time. And you answered quite a bit about it. If you have anything else to share about the gamble that is picking a partner, you're welcome to share.
Yeah, I think it's always a gamble. It's always a little bit of a risk inviting someone into your life, and also deciding to join your life with another person. And there was a thought that came to me when you were saying that, but I have lost it now. Let's see if I can get it back. I feel like sometimes the risks are higher today because, especially in larger cities and with dating apps and other things, there's not necessarily the community support that any relationship needs to thrive and to, because you'll always have conflict come up. And I think what you touched on, as in like different people seek different things. And I actually look at astrology charts and composite charts and the concept of twin flames, which are working out karma from past lives, soulmates, and the fact that it's like some people are complementary in a relationship, complement each other.
Mhm.
And then the concept of two people that are the same, I think there's a comfort in that. And you're right that some people, there's different people are seeking different things from a relationship. And I believe that when the magic happens is when both people are seeking similar things because you have a shared vision to work toward, and that creates basically a third entity in the relationship that can hold it together through conflicts because you're both working towards that. And when I was growing up in a Christian upbringing, I used to do the mailbox club. I'm not sure if anyone remembers that who may have been in the Christian church, but they would send these little pamphlets and little workbooks to do to study the Bible and to study concepts. And I remember there was like an infographic that was like two people and then God. So like those two people are both working toward that spiritual apex, and therefore they're coming together rather than just like in chaos, going apart, coming together.
We you came up with this great idea called Taboo Evolutionary Ideas, and I just happened today to look at a book written by an author named Richard Louv, Louv, who's a gentleman I'm hoping to interview. He wrote a book called The Nature Principle many years ago when I was writing my first book on wellness called Sedentary Nation. And it's all about how we're disconnected in the modern era, most of us anyway, from nature, and that it's really important for us to go out and see the clouds passing, to see the seasons changing, to see the leaves blowing in the wind, to hear the animals, to see the crickets, all these types of things. His a book, I'm not sure if it was two after that one, it's called Our Wild Calling. So we've heard the book, The Call of the Wild. So this one's Our Wild Calling, which leads me into the idea of humans, and they're part of the animal kingdom. And the animal kingdom, we think about biochemistry among wolves and among lions. And I'll summarize it this way: see, sniff, seduce, or assume a dominant or passive stance. So in the case of the male lion, once he gets to be the head of the pride, he is going to see, sniff, seduce, or dominate. And the woman, the female, the lioness, will become passive, and he'll become the father, the sire of the next litter. So that's a little bit of the animal biochemistry. Are we that much different than animals? And if we are, why are we different? So I'll let you see if you want to weigh in on that one, Roxanne.
Thanks, Sifu. Yeah, thanks for introducing that concept. I think it's very interesting because I think the more impulsive and unfiltered people are, they tend to act more animalistic because we are conscious beings, but yet we are driven by these unconscious natural forces, and that's part of life. And each animal in the animal kingdom, or each species, has a different way of operating in relationship and different structures for mating, procreating, and caring for their young. And I think a lot of that is functional. It is based off of what has worked to protect the young, to continue the line for that species. Yet with humans, we do have a choice, and we have operated in different ways over the centuries. And I think, we're also in this like new evolutionary phase, in the age of Aquarius. And it is the playful child. It is friendship. It is community. And you see that in the 60s, like starting to come about. But there are people who are traditionalist, and it's like, which functions better, and how in humans, and how connected are we to our natural impulses or resisting them? And is that where the conflict comes up, in this intersection between we yearn for belonging, and there's something lovely about belonging to one person and focusing on one person and being focused on and feeling special. But then there's also something about having like a broader community support for raising children, for having children, even if we want to be more connected to our own wild nature.
Yeah, one of the things that, thanks so much for sharing that, Roxanne. One of the things that's different in our generation as opposed to our grandparents or great grandparents is that people are living so long. So if you live till you're 100 and you got married at 20, you could be with the same person for 80 years. Now, it may not be bad. It may be a great ride of collaboration, support, love, lots of laughs. It may be wonderful. But if let's say you want 8 things and you get 5 or 6, I think that's a pretty good batting average, right? But let's say some of those 5 things that are on your list that the other person was satisfying are starting to fall along the wayside, and now you wind up at age 60 or 70 with 2 things on that list of 8 things you want. Instead of 5 or 6, now you have 2. So what do? And how honest can you be with the other partner? Let's say you're both age 60 and the other partner is having some mental issues, stress issues, health issues, financial issues, whatever. Can you, as an honest and an honest human with integrity, can you say that you're not satisfied and just get up and, if you're living in a condo, leave the condo, and say, have at it on your own. I can't do this anymore. What are your responsibilities? Those are big questions to answer in your legacy that you're going to leave when you're, maybe on your deathbed, or however you die. That the legacy you leave is how you part of it's how you treat other people, how you treat yourself, your integrity, these types of things. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Roxanne.
Sifu, that is something near and dear to my heart, because functionally in relationship, are we able to meet our own needs, and are we able to meet the needs of our partner? I don't know if you've heard of the psychologist Esther Perel, but she works a lot with the erotic and keeping the like life of a relationship alive, and or the spark of a relationship alive. And often what happens is it dies because we know each other too well. There's something in not completely knowing one another and exploring that other person that keeps the erotic alive. And it leads into this because I think there's, one of our satisfactions is our biological drives to connect with another person through sex and through the inspiration to create. And that energy can be expressed in many different ways, but if we're not excited about the other person, or if one person is overly burdened, resentments can come up and be built, and people look outside of that relationship for maybe what they originally found in that relationship that satisfied them and that met their needs. And then there's progressive couples that often either you call in support that you're going to pay for, like when you're caring for a partner, and hopefully you have the financial means to do that. So nurses, facilities, when it gets to be too much for one person, hopefully you have family or children that can also help meet the needs of a sick parent or a sick child. And there's often people that can't be committed to that process. And can you let go of those people, and those people let go of that responsibility and allow someone else to step in that does have the capacity for that? Or can you have clearing conversations and problem solve so that everyone does get their needs met, and that responsibilities that you initially committed to and agreed to, that you aren't basically pulling the plug on those and abandoning one another?
How important, Roxanne, do you think it is for us to slow down and have tete-a-tete, head-to-head, face-to-face, or little walks where we're not face-to-face, but we're looking off in the distance and we're connected on our walk, of assessing where we are in a couple, assessing what our needs are, assessing, what I should be doing for you, dear, and what I would like you to do for me. How important it is, in your opinion, Roxanne, to slow down and take the time to do those check-ins, those assessments?
I think it's pivotal, Sifu. We don't give ourselves that time in this modern age where it's fast paced and we're just trying to do daily life, and it becomes overwhelming, and we're on our phones and we're checking this and that, and there's so much that goes on in the in between, and people often have separate lives because ever since people started working outside of the homes, or more people working outside of the homes, there is a whole life going on in each individual's life that they're not really a part of.
Mhm.
I overheard a couple talking about how the male partner has a work wife, and the female partner wasn't necessarily stoked about her coming to their wedding, and the male partner actually was consciously keeping them separate because they have very different views, and he didn't want to have a conflict between them because he appreciates both relationships. But the question comes up, then why would you invite that person to a special day where that conflict might come up then? And I think they had to have a discussion about that, and one of their friends suggested that they go ahead and start going to counseling. And I know in the Christian tradition, and in many like churches and communities, that's recommended before marriage, is to have counsel, to make sure you're on the same page, you want the same things in life, so that that conflict is one, there's awareness around it, and two, if it's, unreconcilable differences, you don't go into that commitment and that relationship, that dynamic that is going to be very, very close. And if it's continuously in conflict, isn't going to be functional for either person. And yeah, I think I might have gone off topic, but
Would you help me with how you define a work wife, Roxanne?
well, what these folks defined as a work wife was someone who the partner went to lunch with. They basically had the interactions that you would when courting a person. They supported each other. They were each other's confidants, and these are things that you'd expect to have in a committed and romantic relationship.
And were they intimate or not intimate?
They weren't intimate.
Okay,
No, I mean, not sexually intimate, but there was emotional intimacy.
got it.
And I think that comes up, that that is another aspect of the topic is there's intimacy on various levels, whether it's sexual intimacy, emotional, mental intimacy, and does that threaten the partnership that is being explored and created?
As a female who talks to other females, could you tell us if you've had conversations or thoughts along the lines of the difference between emotional intimacy? Let's say you had a male partner and he was being emotionally intimate with another female with whom he could confide about things that he couldn't confide with you. And maybe any of your friends who have talked about this, and then switch that over to someone who has just a sexual partner where they're very intimate, where they have very little connection after that act is completed. So there are things, we talk about in, in the next day or the weeks thereafter. Oh, he cheated on her, that type of a thing. And that means somebody had sexual intimacy with somebody else. But what about the emotional intimacy? To me, that's a longer lasting connection than a sexually intimate thing that maybe even happens once a week, but there's no connection beyond that sexual intimacy. I'm going on, but maybe you can share your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I've had experiences with that, and many thoughts on it. And again, Esther Perel is someone I love listening to her YouTube videos because she explores those topics as well, and from a psychological perspective. And I think there, depending on how physical intimacy is enacted, there's the potential of that being a long-term connection and commitment as well, because it could be on all levels. I think, it can, there's definitely times when it can be pretty cut and dry for both people. And it also comes back to agreements that people have within their relationship. What is okay, what's not okay? Do we need to redefine that when something changes? But yeah, there's the potential, if protection's not being used, if someone's not on birth control, there's the potential for a child coming out of that. And there's at least an 18-year commitment with that relationship, even if it was just physical or started out as just physical. You're going to have to be mentally or communicate. I mean, you don't have to be, I guess. People step out, people, release others from that responsibility, but that could happen. Condoms break, things happen. Emotionally, I think sometimes it takes time, but it can be easier to walk away because there's the but the collateral is your emotional body, and that can take much time to heal. I mean, there's always, when something ends, there's always a grieving process, and depending on how you grieve, and how deep the emotional connection went, it could take a while to want to be back in a partnership, or to re-find yourself if you got lost in that emotional connection with another person. And there can be jealousy and possessiveness and things that arise. I think for me, and from what my experience and what I observed, is what trauma, what needs aren't being met, or what things are triggered by those extra relationships. Is it, if you want a sense of belonging and specialness, does that deteriorate if your partner is experiencing similar things with someone else and you're not included on that? And some people like to keep things separate. I just had experience with a lover that we had an emotional connection, and he cut off the relationship and tried to get it just to physical intimacy, because I think there was an aspect of guilt because he already had that connection with someone else, which I wasn't privy to. So definitely caused a lot of trauma and drama, because I probably would not have chosen to get into that had I known there was already someone in that place in his life.
Got it.
And so I think, honesty and upfrontness are important. And, there was an interesting thing where the other person just went off on me, but said I didn't want him to get in a committed relationship because he had just broke up with someone, and we're free to do whatever each of us wants to do. And I was like, then what's the big deal? Why are you angry at me? And I think that also leads into another thing. Why do we have different standards for females and males?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I have had the personality of a warrior and a guardian, and it's not to dominate, it's all about fairness. I really like regulating the playing field when there is a dominant personality who is pushing his or her weight around. I like to be, or I'm actually compelled to intercede and either ask questions or to do something, make a comment that might be humorous, to let that person in the group that we're in realize that there's something that I feel is unfair that's taking place. Almost never had to physically involve myself, which have been very blessed. I know a lot of people have gotten into physical altercations, but this idea of the warrior leads me to a question I have of females. Let's say we go back to the Middle Ages, and the female is living in a castle. Maybe she's heiress to the throne, but she's only 16, and she's got a long way to go because her mother is still the queen of that castle and that territory. So the question is, what happens when the invaders come and they take you at age 16, the damsel in distress, and put you on the back of their horse and ride away? Is that a relief, or is that a problem? So I'll throw that to you and see if you can run with that piece of mythology.
Hmm. I think that's interesting because it comes back to the conflict and fight over resources. And I think that's often, on some primal level, and especially with a sense of scarcity mindset, where we're upset about. If I mean, the queen would probably be upset that her daughter was taken, and do these new people feel entitled to her riches and her legacy? Is that why they are taking her? Once she has a child, is that child entitled to all of the lands, and these invaders or people who are outsiders that the kingdom didn't want to have this? So
How rational of you to think that way, for having mentioned yourself as impulsive and irrational before. So that was
but
that was both. So that was very surprising. I asked a friend of mine who's a nurse about the idea of rational versus irrational, and he's a very level person. And he said we're irrational Homo sapiens who are occasionally rational. So I'll start with that. And then the next thing I wanted to share with you is, what if this young lady at age 16, the damsel in distress, is so bored out of her mind in this castle, doing the same thing every day, cannot express herself, has to dress the way other people are asking her to dress, can't go hunting on her own, can't learn the bow and arrow on her own, can't do arts and crafts on her own. There's always the what do they call them in waiting? The people who are around. What's that called?
lady in waiting.
The lady in waiting, and the attendants attending to this young future princess. And so she feels trapped. So that's the word that I want to throw out there, that if the young lady's trapped, she may want to get on the back of that horse, even sight unseen, with the person not removing the armor off their face to see what they look like, getting on the back of that horse. And people would often be pretty darn stinky back in the Middle Ages. Showers were and baths were not always part of the daily routine. So she gets on the back of the horse with stinky man, age 30, age 35, whatever the age is, and rides off going, "Phew, I'm not trapped anymore. I've got a chance at something different." And that's the impulsive nature of that moment. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the stinkiness, because that may be pheromones that she was like very attracted to, and she made that impulsive decision, one out of her, deep desire to be out of her current situation, and two, out of, some primal attraction to this person she has no idea what she's getting into. And we have things now, we put on cologne, soap, everything. We confuse our senses and our pheromones. But yeah, I think there's also the concept of the grass is greener. you know she doesn't know what she's getting into, she just knows she wants out. Is she just stepping into another trap in some way? What if this person is very possessive? What if he doesn't want her to do all the things that she had a desire to do, that the Moors of her kingdom were allowing her to do because she was a female? That's the risk she's taking. But if it was so oppressive within what she grew up in, of course she's going to look for an escape. And the first opportunity that came up, she's going to take it.
So the next thing I wanted to touch base with you on, Roxanne, is where are we in relationships in 2022? So being a person who was born just about 60 years ago, coming up in November, it'll be 60, there's a conversation about the climax that comes from a Meatloaf song that I sent to you. It's called Paradise by the Dashboard Light. And this comes from the generations of people who had automobiles, and then they get the automobile somewhere between the age of 16 and 20, and they go out on a car date, man with car, girl car date. And then the paradise is the intimacy that they share by the dashboard light. So part of the song says, the female singer, before she gets intimate, she says, "I got to know right now, do you love me? Will you love me forever? Do you need me? Will you never leave me? Will you make me so happy for the rest of my life? Will you take me away? Will you make me your wife? I got to know right now. So the man, then he says, he's going to make the promise because he couldn't take it any longer. These are the lyrics. I couldn't take it any longer. Lord, I was crazed. And when the feeling came upon me like a tidal wave, I started swearing to my God and on my mother's grave that I would love you to the end of time. I swore I would love you to the end of time. So now they both sing the duet, and it says, so now I'm praying for the end of time to hurry up and arrive. Because if I got to spend another minute with you, I don't think that I can really survive. I'll never break my promise or forget my vow, but God only knows what I can do right now. Praying for the end of time. That's all that I could do. So there's a little bit of 1970s. And when I've been involved teaching young people in high school, they had some of these same things that they would share, that the female didn't know what to do at the night of the prom. The guy had these hormones raging. He's paying for the limo many times and the boutonnieres and the flowers and the dinner. And he's thinking, I'm a raging age 17-year-old male. I want to have intimacy with this young lady. I really like her. I'm attracted to her. So what's it going to be? What's it going to be? And so maybe you could share your thoughts on where young people are, if you have some thoughts on that in 2022, and the traditions that I've mentioned from my parents' generation in the 1950s, and then me in high school during this Meatloaf song in 1977, Paradise by the Dashboard Light.
That's complex, Sifu, because our young people have less supervision than ever before. And, sex without agreements is more acceptable. And we're inundated by media all the time that use sexuality to sell. And I think it's really difficult for these young people. They're getting conflicted messages all the time. I think, personally for myself, growing up and really wanting to be involved and loving going to church, studying, all of those things really protected me from some of the fallout of getting involved early. Because I'm a very sexual person. And I actually think most people are. I think a lot of people suppress it. And I'll take that back, because there are some people that are asexual. There's a whole spectrum of different ways to express yourself that are in alignment with your values, or in alignment with your impulses. And, from that song, the female, speaking to those agreements, I think, one, it's practical. And if a child does come out of that liaison, they want to make sure that the security, the protection, the love, all of those things are there. And she's trading what the male desires for what she desires. And often that was security, especially in past, especially I'm not sure how far back, but at least when we started seeing marriage and settling down as this sense of belonging and possession. Women used to be actual possessions. People didn't work outside the home. Maybe if you had a farm, everyone worked on it, even the children. But it took a long time for women to be accepted into the workforce. So they were dependent on a male to provide that for them and for any offspring that would come out of the sexual relationship. So they needed to know that they were going to be loved, their children were going to be loved, and because the children often are little mirrors of the parents.
Yeah, that's the mirroring thing. You might have a rebel in the litter of kids, and then you may have some young people who mirror their parents for good or for not good. So it's a tricky thing. The human development, in my opinion, is one of the challenges. And in the animal kingdom, it looks from an outsider, for a wolf or a lion, that if you satisfy your needs, to lick your paws, lick the blood off, and learn how to hunt, and you naturally, once you learn how to hunt, you know how to eat. When you're a hungry lion, you certainly know how to eat, and then you lie around and you digest if you've had a big kill for the next 4 to 6 days, and nobody can mess with you because you're a lion, the king of the jungle. So it seems to me more simple. And then you're probably going to pass away sometime between the age of, the average age of a lioness is probably 8. The average age of a lion might be 3 to 5. It's, they get attacked and killed by the other lions who want to invade and take over the pride. And then if you're a single male lion, you run away. It's hard for you to gather food on your own. You become a scavenger, or you might join in with some other males and form a single male pact, and you can go out and try to hunt that way. But it's certainly no easy thing. But you don't have to worry about this human development. You don't have to worry about Excel spreadsheets. You don't have to worry about fatigue sitting in a cubicle, and then the commute home from work, which I know people, and I've had it before. I used to have a 2 hour and 15-minute commute, which could turn into over 2.5 hours if things went awry. So maybe you share with me your thoughts on human development. Let's take a 10-year-old and get them to age 20. It's some of the challenges for a female in the decision-making process around males, work, schooling, self-image, all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, so Sifu, with the lion example, what if the male lion of the pride, the leader of the pride, gets sick? They're going to be weaker. It's an opportunity for those other males to step up. That's an evolutionary thing. If it was like, oh no, this person is staying in this role, which is sometimes what humans tend to do. Like, no, this person has to stay in this role because it's their role, and no one else can step into that role as long as they're living. Like, if the lions put the amount of resources that humans put into keeping people in certain roles, they would probably go extinct. And they don't have those extra resources. But humans have exploited the resources and caused animals to go extinct, because there's this unacceptance of death. There's this, at all cost, keep the human living, even if they don't have a quality of life, even if it's a struggle, even if it takes all the resources from the family. Assisted suicide or suicide is looked at as wrong. And what if we did give people the choice? And what if we did, like, say, what, there's not the resources to keep this person alive. We're going to go ahead and let them fade out, and we're going to mourn them, and we're going to have ceremony. And I'm starting to get emotional myself, because I just recently lost my father, who was in that situation. And that, brought up a lot of thoughts of this, and when is his soul ready to leave? And we had that conversation, and he really wasn't ready to leave until he knew where he was going. And I think, that's so many times why we're scared to leave, because in this day and age, there's so many conflicting beliefs about where you go when you die. There's a need for us to be at peace with where we're going before we can let go of these bodies.
Wow.
And, yeah.
That's a big one. I can feel for you. I lost my mother a number of years ago. Fortunately, and that's not the proper word, but the reality was, is a better way to put it. We knew she had cancer, and so it was inevitable that sometime within the next 4 years her life was going to end, and on this planet. And so we had full preparation, and she was very ready for it. And then when she got into the point of being decrepit at the end, of course, her body was at the point where it wanted to be elsewhere, and her mind had already changed and gone into a state of decrepitude with the body. So it wasn't something that there were a lot of decisions being made in the last 6 months of her life. It was more caretaking someone who was unable to caretake for themselves, which my father was able to do with assistance very handily. But I can feel for you on the questions that you had, that your father had. So anything else you wanted to share on that, or can we jump to a different point?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd love to share just a few more things that what you just said brought up, Sifu. Yeah, it was interesting because, back on the point of resources, I was running out of resources myself, and reaching out to family, they weren't able to offer any extra resources, and reaching out to the community and to the systems that were in place there, it just wasn't enough. He was going into debt. I was going into energetic debt. I was on caregiver burnout, and it just it literally wasn't practical for him to continue living. But I even had a hard time letting go, knowing that, and he was having a hard time letting go. And there were certain things that needed to happen for him to be able to do that, like visiting with my brother and my niece and having a little bit more time together. I even had a friend that was like, he's just holding on because he wants that last little bit of love. He wants to experience that before leaving. And then also, like I mentioned, with the talks with him, he wasn't sure where he was going. And so I was able to minister to that and tell him what I felt, which is that we go back to source, the universe. People call it different things, God, but that our soul, our energy rejoins that. Or we come back for another cycle in another body as another being if we're not ready to make that transcendence. And I think, that was comforting to him. I'm not sure what he believed in the end, but whatever it was, it allowed him to let go. And he was getting to the point where, food had been a great joy for him, but because he couldn't swallow anymore, he was having to have pureed food. And on Father's Day, he was just like, this food doesn't taste good. They were having to put thickeners in his water. He's like, the water's weird. And I was scared that I was going to have to watch him starve to death. And even the night before his death, I was just thinking, because we had placed him in a facility when he had a fall, and because I was in caregiver burnout, placed him for rehabilitation. But before that, the doctor wanted him to be on hospice. But I finally got him to agree to allow me to do Reiki on him while he was in the hospital because of a brain bleed. And I was adamant with the doctors that he didn't need to go on hospice yet. I advocated for him. My brother was even like, just let him go on hospice. I was like, I don't think he's ready. I had that conversation with his soul, and I pressed the doctors to see his brain scans because he had a brain bleed from the fall. And once I saw him, I was like, oh, I can visualize how to help him with Reiki And he agreed to that. And I was able to go to the hospital late at night, do that, and the next day he could make phrases again, and he could hold his water bottle. And the doctor agreed that he could go into the facility and attempt to rehabilitate. This was also a functional thing, because if he went on hospice, the Medicare and the insurance would not pay for his rehabilitation. And we would have had to go ahead and pay his share of costs for the facility, which I don't know if you know, but maybe from your experience with your parents, but those fees are astronomical. And with the share of cost, it wasn't as bad, but it was about $3,000 something that his pension would cover, but then other expenses were not covered. And this gave him some more time, us some more time together. And I was very hopeful, that he could be rehabilitated, have more time with us. But he plateaued. That wasn't the case. And then the bills were piling up. And I knew if he went on hospice, he might want to come home. And the night before he passed away, that was the thought I had was, do I have the energy, and am I not on burnout enough to bring him home? And can we get enough extra support that we could bring him home so he can possibly have his final days here? And the next morning I was called, and they said he had stopped breathing, that his heart had stopped, and that I needed to get there because the paramedics were coming. And when I arrived, his soul was not in his body anymore. And there was a presence there, and he was still warm, but I believe it was a blessing. And like, my dad had this impeccable sense of timing. And I feel like, knowing what he knew, even in his dementia and Parkinson's experience, I think he let go at this moment where I was still going to be taken care of, which was such a gift from him.
So what I'm going back to now is the point of view of, relationships and the biochemical impulses, and sometimes the treachery, the risks, the fight, flight, and freeze impulses, the wild passion impulses, all these animalistic things and human things together. And then when you have an end of life experience, or someone who becomes disabled, injured, or gets in a very difficult situation, the reality is the human to human contact and how we treat each other becomes ever more present in the role of that being important in our lives. Back to the idea of our legacy. How did we treat other human beings close to us, not very close to us, in the time that we had to spend with those other people? How did we treat them? And it certainly seems to me to trump the biochemical rages that we have for, our interests, our dominance, our sexuality, or our boredom, and all those things. This idea of treating people as we would like to be treated, and honorably, with respect, and for people with religious backgrounds, a religious way, things that were passed down from generations, how to treat each other. I'm not saying everything in the religious text is worth using, but there are plenty of good messages in texts, and in ancient texts, about proper ways to treat people.
So true. And yeah, I left the dogma behind, but there's still great lessons there, like you said, Sifu. And it's interesting because there are people that don't think that way. And there's definitely times when I've suppressed my emotions to the point of them coming out very volatilely. And, and even my father had that pattern. And, the dynamic between him and my mother was pretty toxic.
Yeah.
And that's, a pattern in my own life I've been trying to break. And sometimes I default to it, and it's very hard. And I choose partners that are playing that out because, sometimes that is how we heal, is in relationship. And, that's not a sustainable thing to bring a child into, even though I've wanted children. That is one reason I am not married presently, and I don't have children. And I hope, my hope is that I'm coming to a place where I have healed that and I'm not going to repeat that pattern. And I can choose a partner that is going to be appropriate. That, and it's hard, with going back to my father, I feel like he, in many ways, was very protective, but I was offended by that because I wanted to know more about his life. I wanted him to talk to me more. I wanted to have a deeper emotional connection with him. But there were things in his life he was ashamed of, and that he wanted to protect his daughter from, and even his son. And so sometimes he didn't show up. He had mental illness, and I think, sometimes it was too hard for him to show up to things, especially because there was still conflict between him and my mother. And, being able to look at things from a different perspective like that can give you a lot more compassion for other people, and help to dissipate some of the anger and disappointment that we hold towards other people, and bring about, a possibility for forgiveness. Sometimes it takes lifetimes for people to forgive. And I remember when my dad was in the hospital, I said, because so my mom really wanted children and my dad did not. And they had a fight, and he wanted her back. And that was the agreement, was, well, I want children. And, I don't want to get back into this relationship if that desire is not going to be met. And so he agreed to have children. But I think he was scared of that responsibility. I don't know, if, like, he was a great uncle, but it was hard for him to be a father. And, part of it was my mom made it a little hard because she was protective of us as well. Because he had that propensity to have outbursts too, and like hold in his anger. I think he was a fawner too, a people pleaser, to the detriment of himself. And often that does result in anger and heavy emotions coming out, and a lot of shadow work not being done, and collateral damage, especially to those that are closest to us. And so, yeah, I was like, aren't you glad you had a bargain baby? He was like, hey now. But literally that's what I was like. It was the bargain to keep my mother, which he lost her anyway. That was a lot of the conflict in the relationship, came from his jealousy of her attention to us, because he still needed that mothering and that attention that was showered on him by my mother before she had children.
So I'm looking at your website, which reminds me to repeat it once more, roxanneabel.com, and I'll have that down in the comments under the video. What are your thoughts, Roxanne, about regrouping in the future and sharing a conversation? There's one that I listed in one of our emails that was from Puritans to raves.
I think that's very very interesting dynamic. Because it definitely, there's a control in the thought of Puritanism. I don't know if that's even a word, but I like to make up words sometimes. And going to the other extreme of hedonistic partying.
Yeah.
And so, is it this just two sides of the same coin where there's, this constriction, and when it gets so tight, there's a need for release, and instead of like doing it in this like slow way, there's like explosion, back to the like suppression of emotions. And I think there are people based off their astrology chart that tend to operate in more extremes.
So are you open in the future to perhaps touch on that subject on another conversation?
Yes, Sifu, I think that would be delightful.
Okay, good, because we've done quite a bit of time today and lots of interesting observations shared, some emotional content as well, which is very helpful for me to hear because I definitely want to be grounded in the important things of my response to crisis and my depth, being a human that can go deep and responds in the appropriate way, and is cognizant of those things that are really your legacy. And it's very important in all ages in your life, but especially in mine, which is the gray-haired point of life, your legacy, and making sure you're being honorable in your treatment of yourself, and of your treatment of other people. So why don't we regroup on that in the future? Any final comments, Roxanne?
Yeah, final comments. Actually, what you just said brought up a lot of thoughts for me, because there's, in the work I do, I help people get in touch with their own values, because they are actually very subjective. Different cultures, and especially while, we blend and we have, interactions with people from all over the world, conflict can come up because the values and the mores are different. What someone calls honorable and believes is honorable can be very different from another person. And so we have conflict arise because of that. Um, and also there was a thought coming to me on the concept of forgiveness. That's how can we be gentle with ourselves and with one another when we do overstep, when we don't do the thing that we thought was right, or when we do something we felt was right or was in alignment with our values, but it was not taken the way we intended it, or it caused more damage than good. Like, who's wrong, who's right? It doesn't matter really. It really matters how can it be repaired, and how can we come into harmony again with ourselves, with our own values, and with the other person. And do we need to sort of recalibrate what our values are? Is that how we evolve personally and as a community?
Very, very good points. Yeah. What is honor? How is your honor perceived by someone of a different point of view? Really, really fascinating things to touch on. So I'm glad my mind and heart has been opened in this conversation. I'm Sifu Slim at sifuslim.com, and we welcome on down below on the video your comments, and please like and subscribe, and we will see you around the bend for a future conversation. And thanks so much, Roxanne, for sharing your thoughts with me today. And I wish you a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to share. And thank you for your stimulating questions and thoughts. I really have enjoyed this time together.
Wonderful. Big aloha to all the people out there being peaceful warriors and peaceful pacifists, whatever you're doing. We hope you find peace, mindfulness, togetherness, community, all those lovely things. And we hope you enjoy what your evening meal. How about that? We'll leave you with that. Big aloha.